Uncle Daniel.
Hello.
How's it going there?
Oh, every Sunday, I like to do my scripture study, and I like to just dig into the holy word of the Lord.
Do you have your monogrammed zipper shut triple combination?
I got the quad. I want quad.
Oh, the quad, of course. Ooh. Of course. So for our non-Mormon friends out there, that is a car battery that Mormons carry around with them as the absolute must-have accessory for their terrible clothes. So
yeah, it looks like it might be a bowling bag, but it's actually just carrying their scriptures.
It does look like a bowling bag. It is a massive zip-shut semi-suitcase of bullshit.
Yeah, it's got three books. It's got three books they always read.
Fake leather.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It contains three books they frequently read and one they do not.
So, Doug, what do you have in the triple combo for us today?
Well, I've got some context for us, and it's something we've talked about on the show tangentially several times, but for reasons that I'll explain, I think it needs a little bit of a deeper dive because it will matter in the next few weeks. So anyway, dear Uncle, several weeks ago in episode 136, we talked about Mark Hoffman and the crazy set of events that led to a bombing spree in Salt Lake City in the early 1980s.
I think we should finally just admit that Uncle Mark is, in fact, Mark Hoffman.
Ladies and gentlemen, the mail bomber Mark, that's me.
I've been broadcasting from the Utah State Penitentiary.
I've been broadcasting from solitary this whole time.
So Hoffman was a disaffected Mormon who set about trying to destroy the Mormon church through forgery, dishonesty, and then eventually violence. Today we're going to discuss, and as we discussed, had one of several minor incidents gone in a different direction, he may very well have succeeded in his quest. And as much as I would like to see his ultimate goal accomplished, Mark Hoffman was a dishonest fraudster who turned out to be a murderer and ultimately only managed to temporarily embarrass the church.
Yeah, right.
Today, we're going to talk about another character in modern Mormon history who is the complete opposite of Mark Hoffman in basically every way. Jeremy Runnells was a true-believing devout Mormon back in 2012, where our story will begin. And through his unbreakable sense of honesty and integrity, he produced a document called the CES Letter that, due to its undeniable veracity, might very well accomplish what Mark Hoffman never could. We've referenced the CES letter before on the show.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a very pivotal element in an upcoming interview that I can't talk about right now.
Correct.
But I think will be very fascinating to our listeners. Mm-hmm. I thought it might be nice to explain what the CES letter is and why it represents one of the most existential threats to the Mormon Church in its history.
Yeah.
What is now called the CES letter was originally called the Letter to the CES Director. It was written by Runnells in April of 2013 to the Director of the Church Education System, or CES. That's what CES is. Mm-hmm. This is a tremendously powerful position inside the Mormon Church. It's the Ministry of Propaganda.
Truly.
Yeah. Yep. And this person directs the operations of all four Mormon-owned universities, as well as a galaxy of high schools and high school seminaries and primary and secondary schools around the world. So you're absolutely right, Mark. It is the propaganda wing of the Mormon Church.
Yeah.
The letter itself is a series of questions about aspects of Mormon history and doctrine that had been bothering Runnells since he began digging into church history in 2012. At that time, Runnells was what was called a true believing Mormon, which is a self-imposed moniker that those people, for people who are all in on the faith. That means a full tithe payer with a temple recommend.
Yeah.
In February of 2012, Runnells saw an article in Reuters called Mormonism Besieged by the Modern Age, which described the exodus of especially young people from the church due to the internet and the availability of unflattering information. This caught Runnells completely by surprise because...
By unflattering information, by the way, I think you mean anti-Mormon propaganda.
Exactly.
AKA true.
Yeah.
AKA the truth.
Well, and that's a really good point, Uncle Dan, and we'll talk about that. That is the reflexive reaction to any true believing Mormon to anything that doesn't align exactly with what they were told last week.
Right.
And nothing like this article was being discussed inside the Mormon Church, and it's truly hard to describe how completely some Mormons are cordoned off inside a bubble. If you grow up Mormon in some areas of Utah or Idaho, you may never speak to a non-Mormon or consume non-Mormon news in your life.
It's true.
You go to Mormon schools, you patronize Mormon-owned businesses, you read Mormon-owned newspapers, and you hear only flattering stories about the exponential growth and health of the kingdom of God.
Yeah, and
it's the movie Pleasantville.
You have sanctioned church activities multiple times a week.
Yeah.
Not just Sunday.
Yeah. And you know who the non-Mormons in your community are, and you don't truly socialize with them. You might say hello and try and recruit them, but that's about the extent of your interaction. So Runnells has a passion for the truth that is truly remarkable, and he began to read about what might be causing people to leave his beloved church, and what he began to find was not good. He discovered troubling stories about Joseph Smith, glaring and even comical inaccuracies in the Book of Mormon, and bizarre incidents in the quote-unquote translation of the Book of Mormon and early church history. And most troubling of all, most of the sources he was reading were approved church sources. It bears mentioning here, and we have discussed this before on the show, over the last couple decades, as damaging evidence became more and more difficult to bury regarding, say, the DNA of Native Americans having no Semitic tracers, or the fact that there were no elephants in the Americas, or the arrest records of a young Joseph Smith for treasure hunting and fraud, or the testimonies of several miners that Joseph wed them and bed them in secret, the church embarked on a rearguard action to try and inoculate itself from these facts. So they released a series of essays addressing these issues, and in many cases admitting to them with kind of comical justifications. But, you know, when I say they released these essays, I'm being a bit extravagant. They hid them away in the bowels of various church-owned websites, right?
Yeah, they were created so that they could point, like, any reporter who was writing a story about them and would say, hey, well, what about this? They could point them to that essay on their website, but it's not easy to track them down, and they certainly didn't make them publicize them to their own members.
Certainly not. But if a member stumbled across something, then a bishop or a stake president could say, oh, look here, we've already addressed this. We never hid it from anybody. Now go pay your tithing and don't worry your little head. I mean, it really truly was to try and prevent the inevitable. So it was primarily these essays that Runnells first hit upon. And to your point, Uncle Dan, the normal defense mechanisms of the church were of no use to him because these were not anti-Mormon groups or fabricated lies meant to take the church down. These were official church documents. So this pitched him into a deep faith crisis, which troubled his very devout family. At least at the beginning, Runnells was sincerely trying to find explanations for these discoveries, but found that no one had satisfying answers, and was told more often than not that he should simply stop asking questions. As we'll see, this was not a possibility for Jeremy Runnells, whose dedication to the truth would forever alter his life and may very well end up altering Mormon history as well. Runnells' grandfather was a very prominent Mormon, and out of sincere concern for his grandson's soul, he got in contact with a friend of his who happened to be the director of the church education system. His grandfather convinced Runnells to put his concerns in the form of a letter and promised him that the CES director would be able to put his concerns to rest. And this is so prevalent in Mormonism that you just got to kick it up the chain high enough until someone's got the answer, right? So
we'll figure it out.
Yeah, someone knows. They just haven't, you've got to get it up the chain high enough. So this is how the CES letter came to be. Runnells put all of his concerns into an incredibly well-written, well-researched, and chronological list running to 138 pages in its current form. We'll talk about what I mean by current form because this letter has had some revisions and additions. Runnells sent the letter to the director, who initially responded to Runnells saying that he had received it and that it was, quote, well-written. However, the CES director, as of this record, has not responded to Runnells. And for the record, it's been 7 years. So I don't think an answer's coming. The church has responded, but not in the way that Runnells was expecting, but perhaps exactly what we knew they would do. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the letter. Runnells lays out his concerns with devastating clarity. He focuses first on the Book of Mormon and the myriad problems it has, from the King James Version errors, DNA evidence that not only dates the arrival of the Native Americans to thousands of years before the Book of Mormon, but proves that they came from Asia, not the Middle East, He explores the glaring anachronisms in the book, such as horses, cattle, oxen, sheep, swine, goats, elephants, wheels, chariots, wheat, silk, steel, and iron, all being mentioned in the narrative despite the fact that none of them existed in pre-Columbian America. He discusses the geography of the Book of Mormon with maps of the upstate New York area that show that Joseph Smith lifted the geography and even several place names from his own local area. And you see these maps side to side, and I'm telling you, it's astounding. Runnells lays out that the several source materials that Joseph and his posse clearly stole from to create the Book of Mormon narrative. He goes on to discuss the problems with the translation of the Book of Mormon, the competing and contradictory versions of the first vision, the hammer to the forehead stupidity of the Book of Abraham, the problematic testimonials of the 3 and the 8 witnesses, the influence of Freemasonry in Mormon temple ceremonies, and on and on. And then he digs deep into Joseph's and the other early church leaders' polygamy and polyandry. The source material for this section is often these church leaders themselves, or quotes from the women themselves, in some cases in their own autobiography. The litany is devastating. The strength of the letter is in its no-nonsense, heavily footnoted recitation of the available facts and the sheer megatonnage of damaging and disturbing information. I reread it for the segment, and I still found it shocking. And as we'll talk about, it is nothing short of a torpedo below the waterline of every foundational doctrine and story of the Mormon Church. Runnells originally circulated this letter to a few friends on Facebook before sending it to the CES director, and this was to help him edit it and make sure there were no mistakes. But that early version of the letter began to circulate online in 2013 and 14. I don't know about you guys, but I first heard rumblings about it on Reddit, that there was some document that the church was terrified of, and later that same year I got my copy of the CES letter. As far outside the church as I am, and as much as I thought I knew about its warts and its sins, when I read it, I was floored. No one had put this together kind of in this chronological, just undeniable way.
Yeah, I was the same way. I don't remember how I got up. Maybe you sent it to me, Doug. I don't remember, but like I didn't know anything about the late war. I had no idea about stuff like that, like those very, very direct plagiarisms from contemporary sources. I knew about the view of the Hebrews, but I did not know about the late war.
Yeah, and like I had heard about the Kinderhook plates, but I didn't really know much about that. Anyway, so to put that all in one place, in kind of Runnells style, which is not ornate or it's very straightforward. So, in a concerted smear campaign that the church and its apologists would wage on Runnells, one that lasts to this day, they would accuse him of circulating it originally to damage the church. They have also questioned Runnells' original dedication to the faith, his motives, his financial backers, etc.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that they have so much trouble understanding. Although Runnells is a badass and deserves eternal credit for the work he's done, the fact of the matter is, as far as what is laid out in the CES letter, Runnells is not relevant. What he has compiled will stand or fall on its own veracity, not on the character or motives of Runnells.
Right.
The trap they are in is that the Book of Mormon, given the fact that there is no archaeological evidence for it, must stand or fall on the character of Joseph Smith, and uncles, that character has been found wanting. The church has been forced into the unenviable position of trying to defend the indefensible. To that end, the church and its auxiliary apologist groups, most notably fairmormon.org, have tried to respond to the letter, and the results have been, let's be charitable, pathetic.
Yeah.
There is a point-by-point attempt at refuting the Book of Mormon section of the CES letter on Fair Mormon by one Scott Gordon, and it consists pretty much of, as Eli Bosnick would say, jangly, jangly keys.
Yeah.
Congratulations, by the way, Eli.
Yeah, congrats, Eli and Anna.
Mazel tov.
You guys made a person. Yay.
What a time to bring a baby into the world. Congratulations. Little Maximilian.
Yeah. Well, this section of the fairmormon.org will certainly be the subject of an episode of Square That Circle in the near future. Then there is the debunkingcesletter.com and Jim Bennett's 372-page faithful reply to the CES letter.
I bet that's really fun to read.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't read it, and Jim is a friend of mine, so that's kind of where.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Jim. I don't think he listens to it. He should listen to the show. I'm going to tell him to listen to the show.
Tell him not to listen to this episode. Most of what he's written in his refutation is written at Runnells, and it's in a kind of a
Yeah, tell him
petulant
not to
and
listen to the
mocking
show
tone.
because the queer stuff at the beginning is going to freak his ass out.
He kind of mostly quibbles with syntax and grammar. He'll take entire sections of the CES letter and then use, a proposed lack of context or something like of full context to dismiss that entire section without really addressing the underlying issues.
Yeah.
This is apparently the best that they can do.
He's also 100% convinced that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare. So there you go.
And that,
Okie doke.
and that steel can't burn that hot.
No, that one he's good on.
Okay. The only successful tactic the church has had so far in preventing the spread of this is preventing Mormons from reading it in the first place. Because here's the thing. I do not believe you can read this document as a true believing Mormon and not come away with at least significant doubts. And in many cases, people we know, this document has destroyed their faith, and it's apparently running wild inside Mormonism. Mm-hmm. So, Uncle Mark, you have an anecdote that kind of colors this point.
Yeah, so I have to be very careful how I couch this. So listeners may know that all kinds of people listen to this show. And some of them we have a lot of more ex-Mormon listeners. We have a few people inside what I would call the institution that like to give us information. And one of these people has some proximity to the higher-ups, like the higher-ups. And it was made clear to this person that what is causing what they felt like was an extinction-level event was, quote, the goddamn CES letter.
Yep.
So that comes from pretty deep inside Temple Square. So they like to pretend that they don't think it's a problem, but they are desperate to try to figure out what to do about it.
Yeah, and herein lies the strength of not only the CES letter, but our position. Read it. Read the rebuttals. Read it all.
Yeah.
If your position is to try and deny knowledge, you're on the wrong side.
Remember, we had on one of our very first shows, we had a young returned missionary named Quinn, and he and his companion had somehow gotten a hold of it and printed it out on
their mission.
On the mission, printer, whatever the office is called, the mission home. And they sat down and read it side by side. And when the one kid, his companion, looked at him, he's like, "What do you think?" He's like, "I don't believe this shit anymore." And they were done.
Yeah,
It was over.
The document has a true, I don't want to give it spiritual power. Just it's truly affecting.
Yeah.
Right.
It is a prosecution of the case that is so damning that any jury would find the Book of Mormon guilty.
Yeah, and again, all the evidence is, confessions. Confessions and videotape of confessions.
Yeah.
So this isn't the end of the story, though, as you might expect. The issues that Runnells discovered and the comically lame response of the church led Runnells out of the faith and into atheism. Like many ex-Mormons, myself included, he felt that he had been deceived for most of his life, given that these issues were always there, just intentionally buried in the hope that members would not discover them. So he set up the CES Letter Foundation to spread the letter to as many people, Mormon and non-Mormon, as possible. In fact, many people have taken to writing the website for the CES Letter inside Books of Mormon found in Marriott hotels, and even putting stickers with the website inside Mormon grocery stores, inside Mormon bookstores, etc. Here's one that you will not believe. In 2018, a comic book artist for Marvel named Ryan Otley, an ex-Mormon, drew an image of Spider-Man that was selling himself out to sponsorships. So he had a bunch of sponsorships on his spider suit, and one of them clearly said CES letter. That was in the Marvel universe.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Marvel has since removed the image, but
Aw.
it's been through this foundation that the CES letter has been augmented and in rare cases corrected. And here's another trap the church finds itself in. If new information emerges, Runnells can and has included it in the letter because it's not meant to be divine, but scholarly.
Yeah.
Right.
As archaeology, anthropology, biology, sociology, radiocarbon dating, and DNA have all shredded the Book of Mormon for nearly 200 years, The best that they could do was try to sneak minor changes into it without anyone noticing. But mostly, they're stuck with this fucking albatross, right? It is what it is. All of this has not sat well with church leadership, and the church, in the form of stake president Mark Ivins, met with Runnells several times in 2015 to try and intimidate him into recanting or pulling the letter, which, of course...
Like, how could he do that? Like,
yeah, and what good would it do at this point, right? The thing is out. So finally, they hauled him in April of 2016 to a disciplinary council, which it seems clear was to excommunicate him. Just a little side note, Runnells is hard of hearing and asked that he would be allowed to bring his ALS interpreter so that he could clearly understand and respond to the proceedings. President Ivins refused to allow him his interpreter. Just kind of who these people are.
fucking asshole.
That is...
I forgot about that. Yeah, that was just
astounding.
deeply evil.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really just truly shitty. But
well, and what it says is, no, this isn't for you. This is for us.
Exactly. And here's the thing: Runnells is a badass. He recorded the proceedings, and you can go onto the CES website and you can watch this proceeding. And it's clearly from the very beginning they're just like, "I say your piece so we can excommunicate you."
Right.
And when that became kind of the clear outcome, Runnells told the assembled white dudes that he was excommunicating them from his life, slammed his resignation letter on the table, and walked out. So awesome. So I would encourage.
I'm not fired. I quit.
That's right. You're not breaking up with me.
Which also is from what I know of Jeremy, is a tiny bit out of character because he just seems like the most mellow, sweet, even-keeled guy in the world. He's not
Truly.
He's not the firebrands that your uncles are, I would say.
No, and he had several meetings with these church leaders. He recorded many of them, and you can listen to them. Him not take the bait, them get irritated, and him just stick to the facts. He just sticks to the facts, and gives them every opportunity. Yeah. Answer me. Explain this to me. This is your documentation here I'm showing you. And, of course, they have none, right? So I would encourage everyone to go read it if you haven't. It's not just an incredible story in what it paints of one of our major religions, but it's actually really readable. It's not hard to read. And if you want to know about Mormon history, I think this document and Fawn Brody's No Man Knows My History are probably the two most important ones. Others can quibble with me on that, but yeah, that is the CES letter.
Well, and also, if you have any questions about whether the truth claims of the Mormon Church, I'm sure our listeners, a lot of them are like, wait, but what if it's true though? Because that's probably what they're thinking. And this might sway you one way or another.
Yeah, and also, and of course you can pray, and if you feel a burning in your bosom,
that's true.
You will know that is the still small voice of the Holy Ghost of the Hosanna chapter.
Telling you to ignore all of the facts that Jeremy Runnells has very clearly laid out for you.
It says something profound, that when someone basically puts together a list of questions and a list of documents from the church itself, that compendium is dangerous to the church. What does that say?
Yeah.
So there you go.
I just hope nobody ever looks at my life with that much scrutiny. I'd be screwed.
So what is it, Doug? 110 pages or something now?
130 odd pages. But there's a lot of maps. There's a lot of diagrams. So there's a lot of pictures. Let me put it that way.
And for a long time, it was just a PDF that you could download. Now they've got a full HTML version, so it's searchable. You can just sort of bop through it on the web. It's nice.
All the sources are hyperlinked. It's you can dive into it, and I encourage people to do that. And so does Jeremy Runnells, right? Like, have at it, tear it apart, point out where it's wrong, find the sources that prove it's wrong. Go for it.
Right? Who cares what Jeremy Runnells says? The church doesn't want you to read it. That's a good enough reason, right there.
Yeah, that should raise some eyebrows. And at 130 pages, look, you print it out. You pull the Pearl of Great Price out of your triple combo. You jam that in there. You're going to be better for it.
I read it, with taking notes and working on the summit. Read it in a couple hours. It's not that. It's really, truly very readable.
Yeah.
I didn't read every single footnote this time. I did originally. But, the church definitely doesn't want you to read it or to link it to anybody in the church or send it to any missionaries or write it down somewhere where a Mormon might see it. They definitely don't want you to do that.
And
so
we'll include a link in the show notes so you don't so you can't not send it out. Yeah. I think is what I'm saying.
I hear you.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. The CS letter people, live it, learn it, love it.
Or don't care about it because it's silly Mormonism stuff.
Yeah. Whatever. Do your thing.
Do your thing. Bye.